You ever see a man in a flannel shirt teach a $90,000 zero-cents truck the meaning of gravity? My granddad did, with an excavator older than the HOA charter, a war record nobody dared question, and a look that said, "Try me, clipboard." The day he hoisted that matte black ram like a dead hog over Sweet Creek, something in the air snapped. But the real story didn't start with the splash. It started 6 months earlier when a guy named Dwayne Kessler, all tactical vest and toddler ego, decided our family ranch entrance was his personal parking lot. He called himself the HOA's Director of Community Security, which, near as I could tell, meant bullying folks who didn't vote for him. And if you think that's the worst part, wait until you hear what he did when my girlfriend told him no. That's when my granddad, Everett Carter, Vietnam engineer, retired bulldozer whisperer, and part-time philosopher, decided enough was enough. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. If stories with wild twists, real justice, and just the right dash of HOA madness are your thing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story? Even more jaw-dropping. And the surprises we've got lined up next, oh, you're not going to want to miss a second of it. Trust me. My name's Will Carter, 26th, fifth-generation ranch kid and owner of more boots than neckties. After graduating from Texas A&M with a degree in ag business, I came home to help Granddad run our 210-acre spread just outside Fredericksburg. Our land's been here since 1924, before the HOA, before cul-de-sacs, before people thought backyard fire pits were status symbols, but progress crept in anyway. 5 years back, the Larkspur Hollow development popped up like mushrooms after rain. Beige mansions, final fences, and rules about what shade of beige your shutters had to be. Dwayne was the muscle behind those rules. Or at least, he thought he was. First day I met him, he parked that oversized Ram directly across our gate, stepped out like he was leading a SWAT raid, and told me the road to our property was now under community regulation. He said it with the confidence of a man who's never read a deed in his life. At first I thought it was a mistake. GPS glitch, maybe he was lost. I walked up, polite, tapped the window, told him he was blocking our cattle access. Dwayne rolled it down slow like he was granting an audience, gave me a once-over that landed somewhere between contempt and constipation, and said, "This is a community easement now. Take it up with the board." I explained this was private land, our land, documented back to the Roosevelt administration. He laughed like I'd told a joke. Said the HOA was evacuating zoning continuity and that our ranch disrupted the aesthetic harmony. That's when I realized he wasn't confused. He was playing power games with a map he didn't understand. From then on, it was a parade of passive-aggressive notices, blockades, and threats about code violations that didn't even apply to us. He parked there daily, sometimes with binoculars, like we were running moonshine instead of raising cattle. We tried being civil. Granddad brought him coffee once, even offered him fresh eggs. Dwayne said he'd run it by the board. We sent letters, emails, even got a county mediator involved, but nothing stuck. And then came the moment he crossed from nuisance to menace. My girlfriend, Nadia, law student, tough as boot leather and blessed with the patience of a Sunday school teacher, was walking back from the mailbox when Dwayne stepped out of his truck and made a comment. I won't repeat it, but it was the kind of thing that earns you a face full of hay fork around here. She came inside, pale and shaking, not saying much, but I saw the fire in her eyes. That night, she told me what he said, and I felt something boil low and hot, like used motor oil under pressure. I went outside to confront him, but he'd already peeled off. Just a note on our windshield, maybe it's time to sell to folks who fit the neighborhood. That night, Granddad didn't say much. Just sat in his rocker watching the stars with that distant look vets get when their minds go somewhere quieter than here. Then he spoke. "You know I built bridges in Nam? Not the kind that last, the kind you bait Charlie into blowing up." I nodded, not entirely following. He kept talking. "That man out there, he thinks his truck makes him king. But he doesn't know the ground he's standing on." He tapped the porch rail, smiled faintly. "We don't have to fight him his way. We've got something better. Time, records, and an excavator that still runs hotter than a liar in church. I didn't know exactly what he meant yet, but I could feel it. We weren't just getting even. We were about to build the kind of plan that made war stories worth retelling. And if you've never seen a clipboard tyrant try to gaslight a war vet with zoning talk, well, stick around. That's when the fun begins. There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from watching a law student in reading glasses absolutely dismantle a grown man's fake authority with nothing but a county archive and 3 highlighters. That's what Nadia did. Sat at her kitchen table like a legal sniper, with zoning maps, deed records, and a steaming mug of black coffee, while Dwayne was out front pretending to be Texas Ranger Barbie with a clipboard. Nadia was combing through property records so old, one of them still had colored entrances printed on the survey. Turns out, the Carter Ranch had been properly filed, fenced, and recorded decades before the first granite countertop showed up in Larkspur Hollow. The development wasn't just new, it was trespassing on easement space they didn't even own. You ever watch someone find the paper version of a landmine? Nadia smiled like a poker player pulling a royal flush out of a broken shoebox. I leaned in. "What does it mean?" She grinned. "It means he's parking on borrowed land with counterfeit confidence." We weren't just outside the HOA's reach. Legally speaking, the HOA was squatting on our legal rights like a poodle on a porch it didn't pay for. The road in question, our main gate access, was technically a private easement recorded in 1943, back when the county still used hand-drawn plats and the land was surrounded by farmland, not fenced-in fountains. That road belonged to us. The Carters, not the community, not the HOA, not Dwayne license plate sunglasses Kessler. The deed was as solid as concrete, stamped and filed through 3 generations of clerks, and never once updated to include anything about subdivisions, security patrols, or aesthetic interference. Nadia laid it out like a courtroom closing argument. They have 0 jurisdiction here, Will. None. They built their neighborhood next to you, not over you. You're not under their rules. I blinked, trying to take it in. All those months of threats, notes, and drive-by staring contests? Paper thin. So we've been playing by their rules for nothing? She nodded. Yep. And now it's our turn. Granddad Everett was unbothered but oddly satisfied, like a man who'd been waiting on a letter that finally arrived. He didn't say much at first, just tapped the table with his thumb and muttered, "Time for Operation Backhoe." I paused mid-sip. Wait, what? He leaned back in his chair with that slow Texas drawl and said, "Back in the war, you didn't always fight fire with fire. Sometimes you dug under it, moved the dirt while the other guy watched the smoke." It didn't make sense yet, but I could tell he was planning something not just big, but smart. See, Granddad never raised his voice when he was mad. He just got quiet. The kind of quiet that made people nervous. He said we'd start documenting everything, keep our cool, and let Dwayne keep digging his own hole. "The man's playing sheriff with a toy badge," Granddad said. "Let him. A real bulldozer doesn't honk, it rolls." You could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. And if I've learned anything from a man who built bridges under fire, it's this. When he starts drawing diagrams on napkins, something's about to change. Meanwhile, Dwayne kept showing up, like a bad country song. Same truck, same spot, same smug face like he owned the zip code. Every time I saw him, he had another fake citation or notice clipped under our gate. The guy had a laminated ID badge that looked like it came from a gas station print shop and used words like jurisdictional perimeter violation, which is HOA speak for, "I made this up on the toilet." Nadia started calling him clipboard cosplay, and honestly, it stuck. He strutted around with that little radio on his shoulder like a mall cop who'd just watched one too many episodes of Cops. Every time he rolled his window down and told me I was in violation of visual congruency, I had to bite my lip not to laugh. The man was enforcing imaginary rules on land that wasn't his, and doing it with the confidence of a possum on a power line. It was irritating, sure, but now that we knew the truth, it was also hilarious. And sometimes, humor's the only thing keeping your fists in your pockets. But here's where the real twist starts to tighten. Nadia found a string of zoning filings, half-complete, rushed, and full of technical contradictions. The HOA's own paperwork showed they never legally completed their boundary updates, meaning the entire stretch of land they thought they'd annexed, including our driveway, was still classified as rural private property. Trying to enforce HOA policy on our ranch was like trying to leash a tornado. Pretentious, noisy, and doomed from the jump. Nadia looked up from her laptop with a gleam in her eye. Will, not only do they not own this land, they've been threatening you with rules that don't even apply. This is textbook overreach. She leaned closer. And now we've got the receipts. That's when I felt it, the tide turning. And not just for us. For anyone who's ever been pushed around by a name-tagged nuisance with a false sense of power. Because this wasn't just about fences and trucks anymore. This was about the truth finally getting a toe chain, and we were ready to pull. So we kept quiet. Didn't tell Dwayne what we found. Let him keep yapping about property lines he couldn't spell and rules he didn't understand. But behind the scenes, Granddad started moving. Calling old buddies from his contracting days. Pulling out maps older than Dwayne's moral compass, and taking measurements with that gleam in his eye. This ain't just about land, he said. It's about drawing a line in the dirt deep enough to hold. And when Granddad gets that look, you don't ask questions. You just show up with work gloves and a thermos. What Dwayne didn't know, and what I couldn't wait to watch unfold, was that the man he'd been mocking for months was building a case deeper than any ditch he'd ever dug. And the moment that backhoe roared to life, Dwayne Kessler was going to find out the hard way that old men with maps make terrible enemies. Stick around, because next, that laminated badge of his is about to meet some very real consequences. If you've never had your property turned into a tailgate party by a bunch of HOA goons grilling burgers where your cattle gate used to be, congratulations, you've lived a life free of Dwayne Kessler. Me? I wasn't so lucky. I woke up that Saturday morning to the smell of lighter fluid and Leonard Skinnerd blasting through the mesquites. By the time I got to the front gate, I thought maybe I'd accidentally slept through the county fair. Until I saw Dwayne's truck parked sideways, 3 more rigs lined up next to it, and a full-blown cookout in progress on our gravel drive. Folding chairs, cooler full of beer, a man with neck tattoos flipping burgers on a portable grill 2 feet from our property sign. You ever see someone disrespect your land so thoroughly that it loops past anger and lands somewhere near disbelief? That was me, standing there with coffee in hand and murder in my eyes. Granddad walked up behind me, didn't say a word, just looked at the fence post that had been yanked out and tossed like it was a suggestion, not a boundary. Dwayne spotted us and grinned, raising his beer like he was toasting neighbors at a block party. "Morning, gentlemen. Community Outreach Day. You know, HOA business." His buddies chuckled, as if trespassing was just a rustic pastime. I didn't answer right away because I was counting 5 men, 2 trucks I didn't recognize, and 1 very brave man with mustard on his shirt, standing on land my great-grandfather fenced in with a mule and a dream. I opened my mouth, but Granddad beat me to it. "Dwayne," he said calmly, "you've got 10 minutes to clean this mess up and leave before we file charges." Dwayne leaned back in his chair. "And who exactly you gonna call, old man?" I raised my phone. "Already did." Turns out, Sheriff Ray Blanchard shows up quicker when the caller is Everett Carter and the complaint involves trespassers with a propane tank and no permit. 10 minutes later, the party was over. Unless you count the part where the sheriff stepped out of his cruiser and nearly dropped his coffee. "What in the Sam Hill is this?" he asked, sweeping his eyes over the cooler, the grill, and the trash, already working its way into our drainage ditch. Dwayne jumped up like he was being honored. "Sheriff, glad you're here. We're just holding a little HOA mixer, building community spirit, you know?" Blanchard turned slowly. "On private property?" Dwayne blinked. "Easement access. I have authorization." The sheriff looked at Granddad, then back at Dwayne. Son, I've seen more legal authority written on bar napkins. The smile dropped from Dwayne's face like a bad poker hand, and that's when it got real quiet. Later that day, Sheriff Blanchard pulled me aside while his deputies cataloged the damage: broken gate post, trampled fence line, discarded beer cans, and what I sincerely hope was just barbecue sauce on our mailbox. He handed me a folder and said, "Thought you might want to know who you're really dealing with." Inside were records. Dwayne had been a cop in Austin for 5 years, until 3 excessive force complaints, 1 harassment investigation, and a final incident involving a female victim got him booted off the force. But it didn't end there. His ex-wife, Margaret Kessler, the HOA queen herself, her mother, Clarissa Kessler, the board president who hired Dwayne to be their security contractor, a position that, legally speaking, had as much authority as a scarecrow with a badge sticker. Grandpa looked over my shoulder, skimmed the file, and said, "He's not a threat, Will. He's an opportunity with a badge. And opportunities? You let them get comfortable before you pull the rug out." So we documented everything: photos, timestamps, beer labels, even a selfie one of the trespassers took that showed our address sign in the background. The sheriff promised he'd write it up, but he warned us. This kind of clown doesn't back down, he escalates. Stay alert. And just like that, we cleaned up our land, patched the fence, and waited, because the law was finally tilting in our direction, and Dwayne didn't even know he'd already lost the plot. He was out here playing small-town mafia, but Granddad, he was setting the stage for something far bigger. We didn't respond, didn't fight, didn't rant on social media. We just watched, waited, and kept the receipts. You want to see justice roll slow and steady like a tractor in low gear? You gotta have patience. And a camera. That night, we finally exhaled. Until Nadia came in from the porch, pale as a sheet, holding her phone like it had burned her hand. "They're footprints," she said, "under the bedroom window. Fresh ones." And just like that, the smoke from Dwayne's cheap cookout wasn't the only thing hanging in the air. Something darker had arrived, and we knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. You might think that kind of thing ends with a warning or a fence repair, but when fear starts knocking on your window at night, you stop thinking like a landowner and start preparing like someone under siege. And Dwayne? He'd just escalated into territory you can't barbecue your way out of. Stick around. It's about to get personal. It started with a message. "Saw you at the feed store today. That's a pretty dress." That alone would have been creepy enough, except Nadia hadn't posted anything about where she was that day. Not online, not even to me. The second one came 2 hours later. "You could do better than that, ranch boy. A girl like you deserves protection." It didn't have a name attached, but it didn't need one. There's a kind of stink that only one man leaves behind, and this one reeked of cheap cologne and delusions of authority. Dwayne Kessler wasn't just trespassing anymore, he was circling, and the messages? They weren't flirty, they were rehearsals. He wasn't interested in romance, he was measuring control, like a tailor planning a uniform no one asked to wear. Nadia showed me the screen. Her hands didn't shake, but I could tell she was holding her breath. And when a woman like her holds her breath, you know something's wrong. We went to the sheriff's department the next morning with screenshots, call logs, even a map of cell tower hits that Nadia's friend helped pull together. The deputy behind the desk skimmed the messages and said, "Well, technically, he hasn't made a threat." I blinked. "He's stalking her." The deputy shrugged. "He hasn't said he's going to harm anyone, and she hasn't told him to stop in writing." That's when I realized we weren't just fighting a man, we were fighting an entire system, trained to squint at danger unless it wears a ski mask and announces itself with a chainsaw. Nadia asked, "So if he waits outside my house but doesn't touch me, we're supposed to wait until he escalates?" The deputy just nodded like that made perfect sense. When justice naps, predators throw parties. We walked out of there feeling like we'd just filed a complaint with a vending machine, except this one only took fear and spit out protocol. That night, Granddad was already waiting on the porch, a folder in his lap and a look in his eye that told me we weren't done yet. not by a long shot. "You ever hear of Operation Sweet Creek?" he asked. I shook my head. He opened the folder and started spreading maps across the table like a general prepping for war. Back in '68, we learned the best way to win a ground war wasn't just firepower, it was controlling the terrain. Sweet Creek runs through the bottom edge of our property, always has. According to Texas law, we don't just own the water, we own the creek bed and 20 feet on either side. I leaned in, scanning the faded survey map marked Carter 1923. It showed the exact lines Dwayne had been dancing over for months. "So?" I asked. Granddad tapped the edge of the map. "So Dwayne's been parking in a spot that legally belongs to us and sits right on a strategic water boundary. You want to trap a man? Give him something he thinks he owns." Suddenly it all clicked. The easements, the fencing, the strange way Granddad had been measuring things with that old transit level. "You've been planning this the whole time," I said. He didn't look smug, just focused. "You don't fight men like Dwayne head-on. They're built like bulldozers with broken brakes. You guide them into the ditch and let the mud do the rest." What struck me wasn't just the plan, it was the calm. Granddad was combining a century-old deed with Cold War military logic, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I saw a way forward that didn't end with Nadia sleeping with one eye open. We weren't just defending ourselves, we were reclaiming our ground, inch by inch, document by document. And the best part? Dwayne had no idea we were even on offense. But Dwayne, like most bullies, couldn't stand being ignored. When the texts didn't rattle us, he started driving slower past the house. Then it was headlights parked on the road at night. Then it was trash left near the mailbox, empty beer cans, crushed energy drinks, a note that just said tick-tock. Nadia changed her number. We installed cameras. But it felt like trying to stop a leak with paper towels. Every time we patched one hole, he whispered through another. Granddad stayed steady, but I was starting to fray. "How much longer do we let him get away with this?" I asked one evening. He folded another document, laid it in a waterproof folder, and looked out toward the creek. "Until he puts both feet on the trap, and then we let gravity do the rest." He wasn't speaking metaphorically, and suddenly I found myself wondering, not if we'd win, but how loud the splash would be. Then came the night that changed the tone from tense to terrifying. I was in town at a supplier's late meeting. Nadia was home alone, studying in the kitchen, when headlights flooded the gravel drive. It was Dwayne. Not just passing by. He parked, got out, knocked on the door, then pounded. "Nadia, I know you're in there," he shouted. "You can't avoid me forever." She called me first, then 911. I floored it all the way back. It took me 20 minutes. Police arrived in 40. By the time I pulled into the drive, his truck was gone, but he'd left a parting gift. The windshield on Nadia's car shattered. Our flower beds stomped. And scratched into the wood of the front door were 2 words: "Last chance." I found Nadia in the bedroom with Granddad's old rifle across her lap, tears running silent down her face. She wasn't scared. She was done being scared. And that, right there, was the moment this stopped being a property dispute. Dwayne Kessler had just declared war. And next? He'd find out what happens when the Carters fight back. Stay close. The storm's about to break. The thing about cornering a bully is they never stop digging until they're ankle-deep in their own mess. And Dwayne Kessler was practically shoveling with both hands. After the night he threatened Nadia, the gloves came off. Not publicly, not yet. Granddad always said, "You want a clean victory? Don't swing first. Just let the other guy run head first into the fence he swore didn't exist." And that's exactly what we did. While Dwayne thought we were lying low, we were drawing maps, collecting receipts, and getting ready to show him what happens when old veterans, rookie lawyers, and angry ranchers form a coalition. Nadia's law professor gave her team the green light to take our case as a pro bono learning experience. Turns out, nothing motivates a room full of pre-bar law students like the words possible RICO conspiracy and impersonating a law enforcement officer. Dwayne had no idea, but his HOA sideshow was about to make federal headlines. Of course, the man didn't sit still. After we started documenting his truck's presence under the 72-hour property law, Dwayne got clever, started rotating trucks with his drinking buddies. Different makes, different plates, same parking spot. It was like HOA cosplay night. One day, a silver Chevy. Next day, a camo Ford. All of them stationed like sentries at our gate. But Granddad didn't blink. He took photos, time-stamped them, kept a ledger so meticulous it looked like he was preparing for a tax audit from God himself. "Dwayne's rotating trucks like he's switching hats at a masquerade," Granddad muttered, "but it's still the same fool underneath." Meanwhile, our game plan was evolving. Nadia's team drafted a document trail linking Dwayne's actions not just to harassment, but to organized intimidation under the guise of neighborhood enforcement. You'd think a man who got kicked off the Austin PD would know how paper trails work. Spoiler alert, he didn't. That's when Elise Tran entered the picture, a demolition lawyer with a spine of titanium and a voice like cold brass. She'd taken down 2 corrupt mayors and a dirty water board before lunch, and now she was sitting at our kitchen table with a briefcase full of strategy and a face that didn't flinch when I told her about the death threats. "He thinks he's a hammer," she said, scanning the reports, "but hammers don't know when they're swinging at steel." Elise broke it down like a general walking through battle lines. False reporting, impersonation of an officer, conspiracy to defraud through HOA authority, and civil rights violations. "What you've got," she said, tapping her manicured nail on the paper, "is racketeering under color of authority. In my world, that's called RICO." Nadia looked up from her laptop. "So what's the next step?" Elise smiled. "You don't fire the cannon just yet. First, you build the bridge they didn't see coming." That phrase stuck with me. The bridge we didn't build. Grandpa understood it before I did. Back in the war, he'd helped engineer fake bridges designed to collapse when the enemy marched across. Meanwhile, the real ones, camouflaged, solid, carried the supply lines right under their noses. That's what we were doing, letting Dwayne stomp across the obvious trap, while the real machinery moved quietly through Sweet Creek's legal channels. For all his bluff and bluster, Dwayne didn't realize he wasn't the one playing chess. He was the pawn. Every truck he parked, every message he sent, every barbecue he threw on our gravel drive, it all became one more line in the evidence file. And Granddad, well, he just kept smiling that slow, dangerous smile. "We don't need to scare him," he said one evening. "We just need to give him the rope. He'll do the rest." Then, just when we thought we had everything boxed and labeled, Dwayne went off script. I was at a zoning hearing with Nadia and Elise presenting evidence to the county review board. We'd finally gotten momentum, real movement, real attention. That's when I got the call. Sheriff Blanchard, short, direct. "Will, you need to get home, now." I broke every speed limit between downtown and our ranch, heart in my throat, dread sitting like a boulder in my chest. Because when a man like Blanchard doesn't explain, it's never something you want to hear over the phone. I didn't even ask what happened. I just drove, and all I could think about was Nadia, alone in the house, studying, brave as hell, but still only one person. Dwayne wasn't sending messages anymore. He wasn't rotating trucks. He was stepping through the front door. And this time, he wasn't just bluffing. He was betting it all. Stay close, because the storm that's been building, it just broke. I pulled up to the ranch with my heart beating like it was trying to kick through my rib cage. Nadia was standing on the porch, holding Granddad's old Winchester like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were red, her knuckles white, and behind her, car tires slashed, flower beds stomped, front door scratched with 2 ugly words, "Last chance." That wasn't graffiti. That was a threat. And the man who made it didn't even bother hiding it. Dwayne had pulled up around 9 p.m., banged on the windows, circled the house, and shouted promises dressed as warnings. "You can't hide from this, Nadia. You don't belong here. You think your ranch boy's gonna protect you? The police took nearly 2 hours to show. When they did, it was the same deputy with the same shrug. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no crime. Like Nadia imagined it all between dinner and a bar review flashcard. We didn't just feel ignored, we felt erased. I wanted to put my fist through something, preferably with Dwayne's name on it. But Granddad stopped me the same way he always did. With a look. Not a soft one. Not the kind he gave me as a kid when I broke a fence or lost a calf. This was different. Cold. Surgical. "It's time," he said. Then he pulled a battered lockbox from the closet, flipped it open, and laid out what he called the final chapter of Operation Sweet Creek. Inside were documents, photographs, maps older than the subdivision itself, and a laminated card that outlined Texas Property Code Section 230.01, abandoned vehicles on private property. According to it, any vehicle left unmoved for over 72 hours could legally be impounded or disposed of by the landowner. I blinked. "You mean we can tow it?" Granddad just smiled. "Tow it? Son, we're gonna lift it." Dwayne showed up that Monday morning, smug as ever, parking his actual Ram 2500 in his usual spot like it was a throne made of chrome and bad decisions. He leaned against the tailgate, sipping from a travel mug, sunglasses reflecting our front porch. But what he didn't know was that Granddad had spent the weekend collecting footage, timestamps, and legal backup. This wasn't retaliation. This was legal reclamation. With a diesel engine and a front leader. Sheriff Blanchard had already signed off. Deputies on standby just past the tree line. At 10 a.m. sharp, Granddad climbed into the old case excavator and rolled toward the truck with the same calm he used when hauling hay. Dwayne didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Not until that massive steel arm curled under the front axle and started to lift like it was picking up trash on cleanup day. His coffee hit the ground before his jaw did. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dwayne barked, running toward the machine, arms waving like he had something left to control. Granddad shut off the engine and stood tall in the cab, holding a folder full of documents like a preacher holding court. "This truck has been parked here since Friday morning. That's 77 hours. According to Texas law, it's abandoned property on private land. I'm reclaiming it." Dwayne laughed, wild-eyed. "That's Margaret's truck. You can't touch it." Granddad didn't even blink. "She reported it stolen this morning. Sheriff has the statement." That's when the cruisers pulled up. 4 of them, lights flashing. Sheriff Blanchard stepping out like a man who'd waited years to say, "Drop the act." Dwayne tried to flash his badge. The sheriff grinned. "That badge isn't worth the plastic it's printed on. You're under arrest for impersonating an officer, stalking, trespassing, and about a dozen other things that'll keep you busy for the next 8 years." Dwayne lunged. Probably thought he could run, maybe thought he could talk his way out of it. He didn't make it 5 feet before 2 deputies tackled him into the gravel. While they cuffed him, Granddad turned back to the excavator, lifted the truck another 10 feet, and positioned it directly over the deepest part of Sweet Creek. "Now," he said calmly, "we can pay to tow it to an impound lot for $500, or—" He paused, letting the silence do the talking. Sheriff Blanchard, without missing a beat, said, "We've got video, we've got witnesses. I'd say we're covered." And with that, Granddad opened the hydraulic claw. The truck hung for a breathless second, then dropped like a steel piano, crashing into the creek with a splash big enough to soak the bank. Dwayne let out a noise I can only describe as a man watching his ego hit terminal velocity. And from the tree line, applause. Our neighbors. Quiet, smiling, vindicated. In the aftermath, the fallout moved faster than I expected. Clarissa Kessler, Dwayne's mother-in-law, HOA Queenpin, and local terror in pearls, paid out a settlement so large I'm pretty sure we financed the Newtown Library. She resigned. The HOA security program dissolved. Dwayne pled guilty on enough counts to fill a bingo card and got 8 years with no parole. Nadia opened her own law practice, specializing in property rights and female-led cases. She even took on a few neighbors who'd had their own HOA horror stories. As for Granddad, he didn't gloat, didn't boast, He just returned to the porch, brewed his coffee, and said, "That's what leverage looks like, son. Quiet, heavy, and completely unstoppable when it moves." Now, every time I hear Sweet Creek bubbling past the edge of our land, I remember what Granddad taught me. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't flash a badge or park sideways in front of your gate. Power digs deep, waits, and then moves earth. Like a man with an excavator, a century-old deed and a reason. So if you're ever dealing with a clipboard tyrant who thinks paperwork makes them king, let me leave you with this. Just because someone's loud doesn't mean they're right, and sometimes the loudest justice comes with a splash. You know, standing by that creek watching my granddad lower the excavator arm like Moses parting paperwork, I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about land, or trucks, or even Dwayne. It was about knowing who you are and refusing to move when someone else tries to redraw your lines. We didn't win because we yelled the loudest. We won because we stood quietly on the truth, documented the lies, and waited for the bully to bury himself in his own arrogance. And when the time came, we didn't swing, we just lifted and let gravity do the talking. This story, it isn't just a wild tale with barbecue trespassers, clipboard cowboys, and one very unfortunate Ram 2500. It's a reminder that power doesn't always wear a badge or hide behind bylaws. Sometimes it sits on a porch, sips coffee, and knows exactly when to act. It's about legacy, about standing your ground, not just with muscle, but with maps, memory, and the quiet force of the truth. So if this story made you smile, made you think, or made you remember your own battle with someone who didn't know who they were messing with, leave a comment down below. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to teach a Dwayne the hard way. Smash that like button if you're tired of HOA nonsense and believe in justice that doesn't need to raise its voice. And hit subscribe, because the next story, it's got even more jaw-dropping twists, bigger stakes, and the kind of comeback that makes HOA presidents think twice before putting pen to violation notice. Stick with us. Around here, every creek runs deep and every story ends with a splash.